The desert training ground stretched endlessly, heat rising in shimmering waves from the sand, the horizon blurred into a trembling line where the sky and earth seemed to dissolve into each other. The sun sat heavy above, pressing down on every soldier assembled that day, a silent reminder of the harshness of the land they were learning to master. The air smelled of dust and oil, gunpowder lingering from earlier exercises. A long line of soldiers, sweat trickling beneath their helmets, stood in uneasy silence as the word spread that today's session wasn't just another drill. It was a test, a challenge whispered about but rarely attempted. At the farthest end of the range, barely visible even through squinted eyes, a steel target waited like an unreachable ghost. Most men could hardly spot it without a scope, and fewer still had the courage to even consider aiming at it. Everyone knew the distance. Everyone knew what it meant. That distance belonged to legends. The general, a man hardened by decades of campaigns, his uniform heavy with medals and dust alike, stood with his arms folded, boots planted firmly in the sand. His eyes, narrowed and sharp, scanned the men before him. His voice, deep and commanding, cut through the dry wind. Only legends hit that far. Don't waste time trying. His words carried finality, an iron truth forged from years of watching the impossible remain impossible. The veterans nodded almost instinctively. They had tried before. They knew the sting of bullets falling short, the humiliation of aiming into emptiness. This was no ordinary range. This was the graveyard of pride. But among the soldiers stood a rookie, barely a season past his first real training. His uniform still carried the stiffness of new issue, his boots creaked with every shift of weight, and his rifle, a Barrett that seemed almost too large for him, rested awkwardly in his hands. Yet his eyes, calm, focused, and unwavering, betrayed none of the nervousness expected of someone so fresh. He stepped forward, steady but humble, his voice level as he addressed the general. "Permission to try, sir." A ripple of disbelief spread like wildfire through the men. Some chuckled under their breath, shaking their heads. Others muttered insults about wasted ammunition. A few veterans whispered wagers, their eyes gleaming with the cruelty of watching the inexperienced stumble. But the general, taken aback by the audacity, arched a brow. For a moment he said nothing, then let a thin smirk pull at the corner of his mouth. "Go ahead, soldier. The desert will remind you what distance really means." The rookie nodded once, no trace of arrogance, and moved to the sandbagged firing post. He knelt, positioning the heavy rifle with care, his body folding into the weapon as though the steel and flesh were one. Around him, the murmurs quieted. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. He adjusted the bipod, leaned into the stock, and peered through the scope. What others saw as an unreachable dot in the distance, he saw with startling clarity, a fragile shape swaying in the heat haze. His breathing slowed, every inhale measured, every exhale deliberate. He began calculating silently, the angle of wind tugging at grains of sand, the distortion of heat warping the horizon, the subtle tilt of earth beneath his feet. He felt the rifle's heartbeat against his own, the universe narrowing into one long corridor between him and the steel ghost miles away. The trigger pulled, and the crack of the first shot split the desert. The recoil slammed into his shoulder, but he absorbed it without flinching. The round cut across the air, vanishing into the horizon. The seconds that followed stretched unbearably, each tick of silence crushing the lungs of those who watched. Then, faint but undeniable, came the sound. Metal struck, not a bullseye but close enough to make the impossible suddenly seem within reach. Gasps rippled through the line. Some swore under their breath. Others craned their necks, unable to believe what they'd heard. The rookie didn't flinch. He calmly adjusted the scope, his expression unreadable. The second shot cracked, the sound reverberating through the air like thunder rolling over dunes. Again the unbearable silence stretched, then the target rang, clearer, sharper, struck clean. The target swayed, the sound echoing across the field. The laughter that had mocked him was gone, replaced by silence so deep it pressed on every chest like a weight. The rookie, steady as stone, adjusted once more, each movement of his hands as precise as clockwork. He fired again. Another hit. And again. Another strike. The impossible distance was falling, crumbling under his will. Each bullet carved a place for him not in the ranks of the ordinary but among the very legends the general had spoken of. The soldiers could no longer contain their awe. Some whispered, others simply stared, mouths slightly open. The veterans, men who had thought themselves masters of distance, felt their pride tremble. The rookie's name passed through the ranks like a current, a spark of something new, something undeniable. He wasn't simply lucky. He wasn't simply bold. He was rewriting the very rules they had lived by. The general, who had stood with arms folded and certainty etched into his expression, slowly lowered his hands. His smirk had long faded, replaced by something harder, something more unsettled. He stepped closer, boots pressing into sand with heavy finality, eyes locked on the rookie. He studied him with the intensity of a man whose world had just shifted. The rookie finished his string of shots, unloaded his rifle, and rose with the same calm that had carried him to the firing line. He did not smile. He did not boast. He simply stood, rifle resting against his shoulder, his breathing steady, his eyes still fixed on the horizon as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The general's voice, when it finally came, was lower, edged with something no one had ever heard from him before, respect, mingled with disbelief. "Name, soldier." The rookie answered, giving his full name with clarity, his tone carrying the humility of one who knew he had nothing to prove anymore. The general stared for a long moment, the silence thick around them. At last, he nodded once, slowly. "You've done what only legends have done." The words carried across the assembly, each syllable sinking deep into the hearts of every man who heard them. The rookie said nothing in return, only inclined his head in acknowledgement. The sun was beginning its descent, the desert sky painted with streaks of gold and crimson. The steel target at the far end of the range still swayed faintly, each movement a reminder of the shots that had struck it against all odds. The men would remember this day, tell it in mess halls, whisper it to new recruits, repeat it as if speaking of myth made flesh. But those who were there would never forget the silence, the stillness, the moment when the general's certainty shattered, when a rookie became a legend. And as the last rays of sunlight fell across the range, the story was already etching itself into history. The day a soldier with nothing but focus and faith in his aim rewrote what men believed possible, and made the impossible his own.